Few medieval monarchs have captivated the imagination of historians and storytellers quite like Richard the Lionheart. King of England from 1189 to 1199, Richard I has been immortalized as a warrior king, a noble crusader, and an emblem of medieval chivalry. His exploits on the battlefield, particularly during the Third Crusade, have led to a legacy that endures centuries after his death. However, beneath the layers of legend, Richard's reign was marked by complexities, including political struggles, economic burdens on his kingdom, and prolonged absences from England. Understanding his historical significance requires an exploration of both his military prowess and the consequences of his rule. Born into the powerful Plantagenet dynasty, Richard inherited an empire that spanned across England and vast territories in France. His father, Henry II, was one of the most formidable monarchs of the 12th century, and his mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, was one of the most influential women of the medieval world. From an early age, Richard exhibited qualities that would define his kingship: bravery, military skill, and a fierce sense of ambition. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he spent little time in England, considering it more of a resource for his ambitions rather than his homeland. His focus was on his continental territories and his relentless pursuit of military glory. Richard's reign was dominated by the Third Crusade, a military campaign launched by Christian rulers to reclaim Jerusalem from the Muslim leader Saladin. His journey to the Holy Land cemented his reputation as a fearsome warrior, earning admiration even from his enemies. Despite failing to capture Jerusalem, Richard's tactical brilliance and personal courage became legendary. His confrontations with Saladin, marked by a combination of respect and rivalry, became some of the most famous episodes of the medieval period. The Treaty of Jaffa, which concluded the crusade, was a testament to Richard's diplomatic acumen, allowing Christian pilgrims access to the Holy City while maintaining Muslim control. However, Richard's achievements came at great cost to England and his subjects. To fund his crusade and military campaigns, he imposed heavy taxes, placing financial strain on the kingdom. His prolonged absence from England left governance in the hands of regents, leading to political instability and power struggles. His brother John, who would later become King John of England, used Richard's absence to strengthen his own influence, contributing to internal conflicts that would shape England's political landscape. Richard's return to Europe after the Crusade was not the triumphant homecoming he may have envisioned. While traveling back to England, he was captured and imprisoned by Duke Leopold of Austria, a former ally turned enemy. This imprisonment led to a massive ransom, further draining England's resources. Despite these challenges, Richard eventually regained his freedom, returning to his continental territories to defend them against his longtime rival, Philip II of France. His final years were spent waging war in France, where he met his untimely death during the siege of Calais in 1199. Despite his short reign, Richard's legacy has endured for centuries, shaped largely by romanticized portrayals in literature and legend. He has often been depicted as the ideal chivalric king, a warrior who fought with honor and courage. This image was reinforced by later historical interpretations and works of fiction, including tales of Robin Hood, where Richard appears as a just ruler in contrast to the tyranny of his brother John. Such portrayals, however, often overlook the more pragmatic and ruthless aspects of his rule, including his willingness to exploit his kingdom's wealth for military endeavors. The contrast between legend and reality makes Richard a fascinating historical figure. While he undoubtedly possessed extraordinary martial skills and a charismatic presence, his reign also highlighted the challenges of medieval kingship. His focus on warfare, particularly in the Holy Land of France, meant that England, the kingdom he ruled, was largely governed by others in his absence. This detachment from England raises critical questions about his effectiveness as a monarch. Was he truly a great king, or was he simply a brilliant military leader who neglected his responsibilities at home? Furthermore, Richard's interactions with his contemporaries reveal the intricate political landscape of medieval Europe. His rivalry with Philip II of France, his uneasy alliances with fellow Christian rulers, and his eventual negotiations with Saladin illustrate the complexities of medieval diplomacy. His ability to inspire loyalty among his knights and soldiers was unmatched, but his ruthless pursuit of power and military success also created enemies who sought to undermine him. His capture and imprisonment were direct consequences of the rivalries he fostered throughout his career. Historians continue to debate Richard's place in history. Some view him as a heroic crusader whose military campaigns, though costly, were a reflection of the ideals of his time. Others argue that he was an absentee king whose obsession with warfare overshadowed the governance of his realm. What remains undeniable is that Richard's life was filled with dramatic events that shaped the course of medieval European history. His story embodies the themes of ambition, power, warfare, and legacy, making him one of the most compelling figures of the Middle Ages. This dissertation will explore Richard the Lionheart's life in detail, from his early years and rise to power to his military campaigns and ultimate demise. By examining both his successes and his failures, this study aims to present a balanced perspective on a king whose legend has often overshadowed the realities of his reign. Through this analysis, a clearer understanding of Richard's true impact on history can be achieved, separating myth from fact and assessing the real significance of his rule. Richard the Lionheart was born on September 8, 1157, at Beaumont Palace in Oxford, England. He was the third son of King Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful and influential women of the Middle Ages. His birth occurred during a time of great territorial expansion for the Plantagenet dynasty, which controlled vast lands stretching from England to the south of France. Despite being born in England, Richard spent most of his life on the continent, particularly in the Duchy of Aquitaine, where he was raised and trained in the arts of war and governance. His early years shaped the warrior king persona for which he would later be renowned. As the son of Henry II, Richard was part of a dynasty that sought to consolidate and expand its control over its territories. His mother, Eleanor, was a formidable political figure in her own right. She had previously been married to King Louis VII of France before marrying Henry II, and her influence in both French and English affairs was significant. Eleanor ensured that Richard received an education befitting a future ruler, with a particular emphasis on military training, administration, and chivalric ideals. Unlike his brothers, Richard showed a natural aptitude for warfare, strategy, and leadership, which would define his career. Richard's relationship with his parents was complex. While he admired his mother and often sided with her in disputes, his bond with his father was more strained. Henry II was a powerful and ambitious ruler who sought to maintain control over his sons and their inheritance. As Richard grew older, tensions developed between father and son, particularly over the question of succession. Richard was initially not expected to become king, as his elder brother, Henry the Young King, was the designated heir. However, Richard's ambitions and military skills set him apart, making him a key player in the political struggles of the time. From an early age, Richard was immersed in the violent and unstable world of medieval politics. He was granted the Duchy of Aquitaine in 1169, a region that had long been known for its rebellious nobility and independent spirit. Governing Aquitaine required not only political cunning, but also military strength, as the local lords frequently resisted external authority. Richard quickly proved himself a capable ruler, suppressing revolts and asserting his dominance over the region. His ability to lead armies and impose order on a fractious land earned him a formidable reputation. Richard's military education was not merely theoretical. He gained practical experience in battle from a young age. He led campaigns against rebellious barons in Aquitaine, demonstrating both strategic brilliance and ruthless efficiency. These early battles honed his skills as a commander and reinforced his belief in warfare as a means of asserting power. Unlike his father, who relied heavily on diplomacy and legal reforms, Richard was drawn to the battlefield, where he could prove his valor and decisiveness. One of the defining events of Richard's early years was his involvement in the rebellion against Henry II in 1173 to 1174. Along with his brothers, Henry the Young King and Geoffrey, Duke of Brittany, Richard turned against his father, encouraged by their mother, Eleanor. The rebellion was fueled by resentment over Henry II's attempts to control his sons' inheritances and limit their authority. Richard played a key role in leading the revolt in Aquitaine, demonstrating his ability to rally support and command armies. However, the rebellion ultimately failed, and Henry II reasserted his control over his sons. Richard was forced to submit to his father, but managed to retain his title and lands. Despite his defeat, Richard emerged from the rebellion as a stronger and more experienced leader. Over the following years, he continued to rule Aquitaine with a firm hand, engaging in constant warfare to maintain his authority. His reputation as a fierce warrior grew, and his leadership qualities became evident to both his allies and enemies. His ability to inspire loyalty among his troops and his skill in battle set him apart from his contemporaries. Richard's rise to power was further solidified by the death of his elder brother, Henry the Young King, in 1183. With Henry's passing, Richard became the primary heir to the English throne. However, this new position did not immediately bring peace. Conflicts with his father and his younger brother John continued to shape his path. Henry II attempted to alter the succession in favor of John, which led to further disputes within the family. Richard, determined to secure his inheritance, aligned himself with King Philip II of France, Henry II's longtime rival. This alliance would prove instrumental in his eventual ascension to the throne. By the time Henry II died in 1189, Richard had already established himself as a formidable leader. His early years have been defined by conflict, rebellion, and relentless military campaigns, all of which shaped his identity as a warrior king. Unlike many medieval rulers who balanced governance with military duties, Richard seemed to favor the battlefield over administration. His upbringing under Eleanor of Aquitaine, his struggles against his father, and his experiences in Aquitaine all contributed to his vision of kingship, one centered on conquest, honor, and martial prowess. Richard's early years were crucial in shaping the ruler he would become. His upbringing, battles, and political maneuvers provided him with the experience necessary to claim the English throne. However, his love for warfare and his focus on military glory would define his reign, often at the expense of domestic governance. His ascension to the throne in 1189 marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that would see him embark on the most ambitious military campaign of his life, the Third Crusade. The relationship between Richard the Lionheart and his father, King Henry II, was fraught with tension, rivalry, and ultimately betrayal. While Henry II was a shrewd and pragmatic ruler who sought to consolidate power within his vast Angevin empire, Richard, along with his brothers, was driven by ambition and a desire for autonomy. The conflict between father and son culminated in the Great Revolt of 1173 to 1174, one of the most significant insurrections of the 12th century. This rebellion was not only a personal struggle between Henry II and his sons, but also a broader conflict involving the feudal nobility, foreign monarchs, and the political landscape of medieval Europe. The roots of the rebellion lay in Henry II's desire to maintain control over his territories and his sons' increasing frustration with their lack of authority. As the ruler of England, Normandy, Anjou, and Aquitaine, Henry II had built a powerful empire, but his method of governing was deeply resented by his ambitious sons. Richard, in particular, had been granted control of Aquitaine, but his authority was constantly undermined by his father, who refused to relinquish real power. Richard, like his brothers Henry the Young King and Geoffrey of Brittany, grew dissatisfied with their father's refusal to grant them true independence over their respective domains. The immediate catalyst for the rebellion was Henry II's decision to grant his youngest son, John, certain castles in the Angevin territories. This decision enraged Henry the Young King, who felt that his authority as heir was being undermined. Encouraged by their mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Richard and Geoffrey joined their older brother in open revolt against their father in 1173. The rebellion was not merely a family dispute, but quickly escalated into a widespread uprising, drawing support from powerful nobles who had grievances against Henry II's centralized rule. Eleanor of Aquitaine played a critical role in instigating and supporting the rebellion. As the Duchess of Aquitaine, she had long resented Henry II's attempts to diminish her authority, and she saw the rebellion as an opportunity to regain power. However, her involvement came at a great cost. Henry II responded by capturing her and imprisoning her for the remainder of his reign. Despite losing her direct influence, Eleanor's legacy lived on through Richard, who inherited her fierce independence and military skill. The rebellion was further complicated by the involvement of external forces. King Louis VII of France, still bitter over his previous marriage to Eleanor and eager to weaken Henry II, supported the rebels. The King of Scotland, William the Lion, also took advantage of the conflict by launching invasions into England. The revolt became a significant international crisis, with multiple factions vying for control over Henry II's dominions. Richard, tasked with leading the rebellion in Aquitaine, gained invaluable experience in military strategy and command, skills that would define his later career. Despite initial successes, the rebellion ultimately failed. Henry II, displaying his characteristic political and military brilliance, was able to suppress the uprisings in both England and France. He decisively defeated his rebellious sons and their allies, forcing them into submission. Richard, recognizing the futility of continued resistance, surrendered to his father and was allowed to retain control of Aquitaine under Henry II's supervision. The rebellion had significant consequences. Not only did it cement Henry II's authority, but also shaped Richard's understanding of power and loyalty. Although the revolt ended in failure, it marked a turning point in Richard's relationship with his father. Henry II, though victorious, no longer fully trusted his sons, and tensions between them remained high. Richard, on the other hand, learned a crucial lesson about the nature of kingship. He realized that power was not simply granted by birthright, but had to be seized and defended. His ability to command armies and inspire loyalty during the rebellion demonstrated his potential as a future king, even in the face of defeat. In the years following the rebellion, Richard continued to consolidate his power in Aquitaine, often through brutal means. He faced constant uprisings from local barons who resisted his rule, and he responded with military campaigns that showcased his growing reputation as a fierce warrior. His ability to subdue his rebellious vassals through sheer force and strategic warfare demonstrated his evolution as a leader. Unlike his father, who preferred diplomacy and law to maintain control, Richard relied on military strength and decisive action. The final break between Richard and Henry II came in the late 1180s when King Philip II of France began encouraging Richard to turn against his father once again. Philip, eager to weaken the Angevin Empire, capitalized on the growing tensions between Henry and Richard. By 1189, Richard openly allied with Philip II against Henry II, leading to the final confrontation between father and son. This time, Henry II, weakened by illness and betrayal, was unable to withstand the opposition. He was forced to negotiate peace, and shortly afterward, he died, broken and defeated. With Henry II's death, Richard ascended to the throne of England, marking the beginning of a new era. His rebellion against his father, though initially unsuccessful, had ultimately paved the way for his kingship. The conflict had shaped him into a hardened military leader, one who valued strength, loyalty, and conquest above all else. As he took the throne in 1189, Richard was no longer just a rebellious prince. He was now a king ready to embark on a legendary reign, defined by war, ambition, and the pursuit of glory. Richard the Lionheart's ascension to the English throne in 1189 marked the beginning of a reign dominated by military ambition and the pursuit of glory. Upon the death of his father, Henry II, Richard inherited the vast Angevin Empire, which included England, Normandy, Anjou, Aquitaine, and other territories in France. However, Unlike his predecessors, Richard had little interest in ruling England directly. Instead, he viewed his kingdom primarily as a source of financial and military support for his greater ambition, the Third Crusade. His first years as king were thus characterized by efforts to secure his realm, consolidate his authority, and prepare for the most significant military campaign of his life. Richard's coronation took place on September 3, 1189, at Westminster Abbey. The ceremony was marked by grandeur, but it was also marred by violence. Anti-Jewish riots erupted in London, as rumors spread that Richard had ordered the exclusion of Jews from the event. In reality, Richard attempted to suppress the violence, but his failure to control the situation led to widespread massacres of Jewish communities, setting a dark precedent early in his reign. These events highlighted Richard's detachment from domestic affairs, as his primary focus remained on foreign military expeditions rather than internal governance. One of Richard's first challenges as king was to secure his empire against potential threats. The Angevin territories were vast and constantly under pressure from rival powers, particularly King Philip II of France. Richard had initially allied with Philip against his father, but their relationship quickly became tense after Henry II's death. Philip sought to weaken the Angevin Empire, and Richard had to tread carefully to maintain his dominance while preparing for the crusade. To ensure stability in his absence, Richard appointed loyal officials to govern his territories, including his mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, who played a crucial role in managing England and keeping the nobility in check. Richard's most pressing concern, however, was financing the crusade. The Third Crusade had been launched in response to the capture of Jerusalem by the Muslim leader Saladin in 1187. As a deeply devout Christian and a warrior at heart, Richard saw the crusade as an opportunity to achieve both religious salvation and personal glory. However, leading a military expedition to the Holy Land required enormous financial resources. To fund the crusade, Richard implemented heavy taxation, including the infamous Saladin tithe, which required his subjects to contribute significant sums to the war effort. He also sold royal offices, lands, and even titles, famously declaring that he would sell London if he could find a buyer. While these measures successfully raised the necessary funds, they also placed a heavy burden on the English population. The high taxation led to resentment among the nobility and commoners alike, but Richard was largely indifferent to their concerns. His single-minded focus on the crusade meant that he delegated much of the kingdom's administration to his trusted advisors, including William Longchamp, whom he appointed as Chancellor and Justiciar of England. Longchamp, however, proved to be an unpopular choice, as his authoritarian rule and French background alienated many English nobles, particularly Richard's brother John, who harbored his own ambitions for power. Before departing for the crusade, Richard took steps to secure his kingdom against internal threats. Aware of John's ambitions and the potential for unrest, he sought to limit his brother's influence. He granted John extensive lands, but forbade him from setting foot in England during his absence. He also established alliances with key nobles and ensured that his mother, Eleanor, would act as a stabilizing force. However, despite these precautions, his departure would ultimately lead to political instability and intrigue in England. With his kingdom secured and his forces assembled, Richard set out on the Third Crusade in 1190. He was joined by King Philip II of France and Emperor Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire, though their alliance was fragile. Each ruler had their own ambitions, and tensions between them were evident from the outset. Richard's charismatic leadership and military reputation made him a dominant figure in the crusade, but his rivalry with Philip II would eventually lead to complications. The journey to the Holy Land was fraught with difficulties. While passing through Sicily, Richard became embroiled in local conflicts, asserting his dominance over the island's ruler, Tancred. His arrival in Cyprus in 1191 further demonstrated his military prowess, as he swiftly conquered the island from the Byzantine ruler Isaac Komnenos. This conquest not only secured a vital strategic base for the crusade, but also showcased Richard's ability to seize opportunities for territorial expansion. His marriage to Berengaria of Navarre took place in Cyprus, but their union was largely political, and their relationship remained distant throughout his life. As Richard approached the Holy Land, his reputation as a formidable warrior grew. His leadership inspired loyalty among his men, and his victories in Sicily and Cyprus reinforced his status as one of the most capable military commanders of his time. However, tensions with his allies, particularly Philip II, continued to escalate. Philip resented Richard's dominance and sought to undermine him, leading to conflicts that would later shape the course of European politics. Richard's preparation for the Third Crusade demonstrated his ability to mobilize vast resources, secure his kingdom, and assert his authority on the international stage. However, it also revealed his weaknesses as a ruler. His neglect of domestic governance, his reliance on heavy taxation, and his inability to manage political rivalries would create long-term consequences for England and the Angevin Empire. As he embarked on his crusade, Richard was fully committed to his role as a warrior king. But the challenges ahead would test both his military genius and his ability to navigate the complex realities of medieval politics. The Third Crusade, launched in response to Saladin's capture of Jerusalem in 1187, was one of the most significant military campaigns of the Middle Ages. For Richard the Lionheart, this crusade was not merely a religious mission, but a personal quest for glory and military supremacy. His arrival in the Holy Land in 1191 marked the beginning of a series of fierce battles, diplomatic maneuvers, and internal conflicts that would define his legacy as one of history's greatest warrior kings. However, the crusade was not without its challenges, as Richard's leadership was constantly tested by rivalries with his allies, logistical difficulties, and the formidable resistance of Saladin's forces. Richard's first major engagement in the Holy Land was the Siege of Acre, which had been ongoing for nearly 2 years before his arrival. The city was a crucial stronghold, and its capture was essential for the success of the crusade. Upon reaching Acre, Richard immediately demonstrated his strategic acumen, implementing aggressive tactics to break the city's defenses. His military leadership, combined with the reinforcements he brought, led to Acre's surrender in July 1191. This victory was a significant morale boost for the Crusaders, but also intensified the growing tensions between Richard and King Philip II of France. The aftermath of the siege exposed Richard's ruthless nature. Following the city's surrender, negotiations with Saladin over the release of prisoners and payment of ransom stalled. Frustrated by the delays, Richard ordered the mass execution of approximately 2,700 Muslim prisoners, an act that shocked even his contemporaries. While this decision may have been intended to demonstrate his resolve, it also hardened Saladin's resistance and intensified the animosity between the opposing forces. The execution at Acre remains one of the most controversial aspects of Richard's crusade, reflecting both his uncompromising military approach and his willingness to use brutality as a strategic tool. Despite the success at Acre, the unity among the Crusader leaders quickly disintegrated. King Philip II of France, who had been Richard's ally against Henry II, grew increasingly resentful of Richard's dominance and military successes. Their rivalry, which had been evident even before the crusade, reached a breaking point after the fall of Acre. Philip, feeling overshadowed and wary of Richard's growing influence, decided to return to France, leaving the crusade largely in Richard's hands. This departure had significant consequences, as it allowed Philip to begin undermining Richard's rule in Europe, while Richard remained focused on the Holy Land. With Philip gone, Richard assumed full command of the Crusader forces. His next major objective was the capture of Jaffa, a strategic coastal city. The Battle of Arsuf, fought in September 1191, was one of the defining moments of the crusade. Saladin, recognizing the threat posed by Richard's forces, launched a series of attacks on the Crusader army as it marched along the coast. Richard, displaying his tactical brilliance, maintained discipline among his troops and launched a decisive counterattack at the right moment, routing Saladin's forces. The victory at Arsuf reinforced Richard's reputation as an exceptional military leader and dealt a significant blow to Saladin's morale. Following the success at Arsuf, Richard captured Jaffa, securing a vital stronghold for the Crusaders. However, his ultimate goal, recapturing Jerusalem, remained elusive. Despite his battlefield victories, Richard faced enormous logistical and strategic challenges. The terrain around Jerusalem made it difficult for the Crusaders to maintain supply lines, and Saladin's forces continued to employ guerrilla tactics, harassing Richard's army at every opportunity. Moreover, disagreements among the Crusaders regarding the best course of action further complicated matters. Richard, recognizing that an assault on Jerusalem without adequate reinforcements would be disastrous, ultimately decided against attacking the city directly. Throughout the campaign, Richard and Saladin developed a mutual respect for each other's military prowess. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Richard viewed Saladin not merely as an enemy, but as a worthy adversary. Their interactions, including exchanges of diplomatic messages and negotiations, reflected a complex dynamic of rivalry and admiration. Saladin, for his part, recognized Richard as a formidable opponent and took measures to counter his strategies. This respect between the two leaders is one of the most remarkable aspects of the Third Crusade, showcasing the chivalric ideals that defined medieval warfare. As the crusade dragged on, Richard's attention was increasingly drawn back to Europe. Reports of political unrest in England and Philip II's machinations in France forced him to consider ending his campaign. By 1192, it was clear that the ultimate goal of reclaiming Jerusalem would not be achieved. Instead, Richard negotiated a truce with Saladin, securing Christian access to Jerusalem for pilgrimage while maintaining Crusader control over key coastal cities. Though some saw this compromise as a failure, it was a pragmatic decision that preserved the gains of the crusade while allowing Richard to return to his own kingdom. The conclusion of the Third Crusade marked the end of Richard's time in the Holy Land, but his reputation as a warrior king had been firmly established. Despite failing to reclaim Jerusalem, his victories at Acre, Arsuf, and Jaffa solidified his status as one of the greatest military leaders of his time. However, the conflicts he left unresolved in Europe would soon prove to be his greatest challenge. As he began his journey back home, Richard was unaware that his return would be fraught with danger, leading to one of the most dramatic episodes of his life: his capture and imprisonment. Richard's experience in the Holy Land demonstrated both his strengths and his flaws as a ruler. His military genius, courage, and determination earned him widespread admiration. Yet his obsession with warfare and personal glory came at the cost of effective governance. His neglect of domestic affairs, his strained alliances, and his growing list of enemies would soon create a series of crises that would define the latter part of his reign. The Third Crusade had tested Richard's abilities as a leader, but his most difficult battles were yet to come. As Richard the Lionheart departed the Holy Land in late 1192, he was eager to return to his domains in Europe. His time in the Third Crusade had cemented his reputation as a brilliant military leader, but it had also weakened his political position at home. France, under King Philip II, was already maneuvering to seize parts of the Angevin Empire, while his brother John was plotting to claim the English throne in his absence. However, before Richard could face these challenges, he encountered an unforeseen danger: his capture and imprisonment, a dramatic episode that would reshape his reign. Richard's journey back to England was fraught with peril from the outset. Knowing that he had made powerful enemies during the Crusade, he sought to avoid territories controlled by his rivals. Instead of taking a direct route home, he attempted to travel through the Holy Roman Empire in disguise. However, this plan ultimately failed. In December 1192, while passing through Austria, Richard was recognized near Vienna. The man responsible for his capture was Duke Leopold V of Austria, a former ally whom Richard had insulted during the Crusade by casting his banner from the walls of Acre. Seizing the opportunity for revenge and political gain, Leopold arrested Richard and placed him in captivity. Leopold soon transferred Richard to the custody of Henry VI, the Holy Roman Emperor. Unlike Leopold, who had personal grievances against Richard, Henry VI saw his prisoner as a valuable asset. Holding the King of England captive gave him immense leverage over European politics, and he sought to extract as much wealth and power from the situation as possible. News of Richard's imprisonment sent shockwaves across Europe, particularly in England, where his absence threatened the stability of the realm. Back in England, Richard's brother John saw his captivity as an opportunity to seize power. John, who had long resented his older brother's dominance, conspired with Philip II of France to weaken Richard's rule. Together, they spread false rumors that Richard would never return and attempted to consolidate control over England and the Angevin territories. Philip, always eager to undermine his Angevin rival, invaded Normandy and seized several key fortresses. The political instability caused by Richard's absence highlighted the fragility of his rule. Despite his military prowess, he had neglected to build a stable government that could function without his direct oversight. Richard's imprisonment also raised significant financial concerns. The Holy Roman Emperor demanded an enormous ransom of 150,000 marks for his release, an astronomical sum equivalent to several years' worth of royal revenue. To secure Richard's freedom, England was subjected to one of the most extensive taxation efforts in its history. Nobles, clergy, and commoners alike were forced to contribute, and the kingdom's economy suffered under the weight of the ransom demands. Richard's mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, played a crucial role in organizing the collection, traveling across England and Normandy to rally support for her son's release. The efforts to raise the ransom were met with resistance from John and Philip, who sought to prolong Richard's captivity. John even went so far as to offer Emperor Henry VI a bribe to keep Richard imprisoned indefinitely. However, despite their scheming, Eleanor's persistence and the loyalty of many of Richard's supporters ensured that the necessary funds were eventually gathered. In 1194, after more than a year in captivity, the ransom was paid and Richard was finally released. Richard's return to England was triumphant but short-lived. Upon his arrival, he swiftly moved to reclaim his authority, quelling John's rebellion and securing the loyalty of his barons. Unlike many kings who would have sought vengeance against a treacherous sibling, Richard displayed political pragmatism. He forgave John, declaring in a display of royal magnanimity, "I forgive him, and I hope he has learned his lesson." However, his focus was not on governing England. His true priority remained the defense of his continental empire against Philip II of France. His captivity had given Philip a considerable advantage, and Richard knew that his kingdom was at risk. Within weeks of his return, he left England for Normandy, determined to reclaim the lands lost during his imprisonment. This decision reaffirmed his long-held view of England as a source of financial and military support rather than a primary seat of power. Unlike his father, Henry II, who had spent much of his reign strengthening England's legal and administrative systems, Richard's interests lay elsewhere. Richard's experience as a prisoner had a profound impact on European politics. His release was a testament to the loyalty he commanded among his subjects, but it also demonstrated the vulnerability of even the most powerful rulers. His captivity had drained England's treasury, weakened Angevin control over Normandy, and emboldened his enemies. Despite his military brilliance, his absence from governance had lasting consequences, leaving his empire in a fragile state. As he prepared for his final conflict with Philip II, Richard remained unchanged in his core identity. He was first and foremost a warrior, not an administrator. His next and final years would be spent in constant warfare, fighting to reclaim his lost territories and restore his family's dominance in France. However, even the Lionheart, for all his military skill and battlefield success, could not escape the fate that awaited him. Upon his release from captivity in 1194, Richard the Lionheart faced the daunting task of reclaiming control over his vast Angevin empire. His prolonged absence had emboldened his enemies, particularly Philip II of France, who had seized key territories in Normandy, Anjou, and Aquitaine. Meanwhile, his brother John's failed rebellion had weakened internal stability, forcing Richard to consolidate power quickly before turning his full attention to the war against France. The final years of his life would be dominated by relentless military campaigns, a testament to his enduring role as a warrior king. Richard wasted no time in reasserting his authority. His first priority was to restore order in England, which had been heavily taxed to pay his ransom. Despite his financial burdens, Richard chose to spend only a brief period in England, delegating administrative control to his trusted officials while focusing on the Continental War. This decision reinforced his long-standing view that England was merely a source of revenue rather than a homeland. By appointing Hubert Walter as Justiciar and Archbishop of Canterbury, Richard ensured that England remained stable, allowing him to pursue his military ambitions abroad. With his internal affairs secured, Richard launched an aggressive campaign against Philip II. He quickly reclaimed lost Angevin strongholds, demonstrating the same military prowess that had made him a legend during the Crusades. His strategic use of siege warfare, surprise attacks, and calculated diplomacy allowed him to recover significant territory, reversing many of Philip's gains. The rivalry between the two kings reached new heights, as both sought dominance over Western Europe. Unlike previous conflicts between the Angevin and Capetian dynasties, this war was deeply personal, fueled by years of betrayal, shifting alliances, and mutual disdain. One of Richard's key strategies was the construction of a formidable defensive network along the borders of Normandy. The most ambitious of these fortifications was Château Gallard, a massive fortress built between 1196 and 1198. Perched on a cliff overlooking the Seine River, Château Gallard was a marvel of medieval military engineering, designed to be nearly impregnable. Richard personally oversaw its construction, emphasizing speed and efficiency. The fortress symbolized his determination to secure Normandy against Philip's relentless assaults and remains one of his most enduring legacies. Despite his military successes, Richard's war against Philip II was costly. The constant need for resources forced him to impose heavy taxes on his subjects, further straining the finances of his empire. However, unlike his father, Henry II, Richard was less concerned with administrative reforms and governance. His singular focus on military conquest meant that many of his territorial gains were short-lived, as they lacked the political infrastructure needed for long-term stability. His reliance on warfare as the primary tool of governance underscored his strengths as a military commander, but also exposed his weaknesses as a ruler. The conflict with France also involved complex diplomatic maneuvering. Richard skillfully forged alliances with various European powers, including the Counts of Flanders and Boulogne, to isolate Philip II. These alliances helped to check French expansion, forcing Philip to fight on multiple fronts. However, Philip, an equally shrewd politician, countered Richard's moves by exploiting divisions within the Angevin territories. His ability to undermine Richard's authority through diplomacy and strategic marriages ensured that the war remained a prolonged and bitter struggle. Richard's final campaign took place in Limousin, a contested region in Aquitaine. In 1199, he launched an offensive against rebellious vassals who had aligned themselves with Philip. During the siege of the small but strategically significant castle of Cailles-Chabrol, Richard personally inspected the battlefield, as was his custom. However, this decision proved fatal. While surveying the enemy fortifications, he was struck by a crossbow bolt, fired by an unknown defender. The wound, initially not considered life-threatening, soon became infected, sealing Richard's fate. As he lay dying, Richard displayed a characteristic mixture of defiance and chivalry. According to chroniclers, he forgave the crossbowman who had shot him, a gesture in line with the ideals of knightly conduct that he had long championed. His mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, rushed to his side, ensuring that his final days were spent in the company of those who had been most loyal to him. On April 6, 1199, at the age of 41, Richard the Lionheart succumbed to his wound, bringing an abrupt end to his tumultuous reign. Richard's death left the Angevin Empire in turmoil. Lacking a direct heir, His passing created a power vacuum that his brother John would struggle to fill. Philip II, ever the opportunist, quickly took advantage of the situation, intensifying his efforts to dismantle Angevin control in France. Within a few years, many of Richard's hard-won victories would be reversed, underscoring the fragility of his empire and the limitations of a rule based primarily on military conquest rather than governance. Despite his flaws, Richard the Lionheart remains one of the most iconic figures of the medieval era. His military brilliance, unwavering courage, and larger-than-life persona ensured his place in history. However, his reign also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing war over governance. While he earned the admiration of his contemporaries and later generations, his inability to build a stable political foundation ultimately left his empire vulnerable to collapse. His war with France was both a testament to his strength and a reminder of his greatest weakness: the inability to secure a lasting legacy beyond the battlefield. The death of Richard the Lionheart in 1199 marked a turning point in the history of the Angevin Empire. His passing left a power vacuum that his brother, John, struggled to fill, and it provided King Philip II of France with an unprecedented opportunity to dismantle Angevin dominance on the continent. While Richard's military prowess had maintained the empire's territorial integrity, his failure to establish a stable political structure meant that his conquests were vulnerable to collapse. His legacy, therefore, was one of both glory and fragility. He was a warrior king whose empire began to unravel shortly after his death. One of the most immediate consequences of Richard's death was the succession crisis that followed. With no legitimate heirs, the throne fell to his younger brother, John, whose reputation for treachery and poor leadership contrasted sharply with Richard's image as a courageous and chivalrous ruler. However, John's claim to the throne was contested by Arthur of Brittany, the son of Richard's deceased older brother Geoffrey. This dispute provided Philip II of France with an opportunity to intervene in Angevin affairs, further weakening the empire. Philip wasted no time exploiting the instability. He quickly sided with Arthur and launched military campaigns against John, seizing large portions of Normandy and Anjou. Unlike Richard, who had managed to counter Philip's advances through military strength and strategic alliances, John lacked the charisma and military genius necessary to hold the empire together. Within a few years, much of Richard's work had been undone, and the French king's dream of dismantling Angevin control in France was becoming a reality. The rapid decline of the Angevin Empire after Richard's death highlights a fundamental flaw in his leadership: his failure to prioritize governance over warfare. While his military victories had been impressive, they were often short-lived because they lacked a strong administrative foundation. Richard's focus on military conquest, particularly during the Third Crusade and his war with France, meant that he spent little time governing his lands or developing policies that could ensure long-term stability. Furthermore, Richard's financial policies placed a heavy burden on his subjects. The immense cost of his military campaigns, coupled with the exorbitant ransom demanded for his release from captivity, had drained the treasury of England and its territories. To fund his wars, Richard imposed heavy taxation, which created resentment among the nobility and commoners alike. While he was able to maintain order through his sheer reputation and military dominance, his successor, John, inherited an economically weakened kingdom that was ripe for rebellion. Despite these shortcomings, Richard's legacy endured in both historical memory and cultural representation. During his lifetime, he was celebrated as a model of medieval chivalry, a fearless knight and a noble crusader who embodied the ideals of honor and bravery. Chroniclers of the time, such as Roger of Howden and Richard of Devizes, painted him as a larger-than-life figure whose exploits rival those of legendary heroes. This image persisted for centuries, influencing the way he was remembered in literature, art, and folklore. One of the most enduring aspects of Richard's legacy is his association with the legend of Robin Hood. Although there is little historical evidence linking Richard directly to the outlaw, later retellings of the Robin Hood story often portray him as the rightful king whose return would restore justice to England. This narrative further solidified his reputation as a heroic figure, contrasting him with the villainous depiction of his brother, John. Even though the historical reality was far more complex, the legend of Richard as the benevolent and absent king remains deeply ingrained in popular culture. Richard's military innovations also left a lasting impact on medieval warfare. His use of advanced siege tactics, particularly during his campaigns in the Holy Land of France, influenced military strategies for generations. His construction of chateaux gallards set new standards for castle design, showcasing the importance of defensive architecture in medieval conflicts. These contributions to military strategy and fortification reinforced his reputation as one of the greatest commanders of his time. Nevertheless, Richard's failure to secure a lasting empire raises important questions about his leadership. Was he truly a great king, or merely a great warrior? His reign demonstrated that military brilliance alone was not sufficient to ensure the stability of a kingdom. His neglect of domestic affairs, his excessive focus on war, and his reliance on heavy taxation left his empire vulnerable to collapse. While he succeeded in winning battles, he ultimately failed to build a sustainable political legacy. In the end, Richard the Lionheart remains a paradoxical figure, admired for his courage, but criticized for his lack of foresight. His life was defined by warfare, and his death marked the beginning of the end for the Angevin Empire. Though he is celebrated as one of England's most iconic monarchs, his reign serves as a reminder that power built solely on military strength is often fleeting. His legacy is one of both triumph and tragedy, a ruler whose name became legendary, but whose empire could not withstand the test of time. The legacy of Richard the Lionheart extends far beyond his actual reign, as his image has been shaped and reshaped by history, legend, and cultural narratives. Unlike many medieval monarchs who have faded into relative obscurity, Richard remains one of the most famous kings of England, despite spending very little time in the country he ruled. His reputation as a warrior king, crusader, and symbol of chivalry has endured for centuries, influencing literature, art, and even modern politics. However, the contrast between the historical Richard and the legendary Richard raises important questions about how history is remembered and interpreted. During his lifetime, Richard's exploits were already the subject of great admiration. Medieval chroniclers such as Roger of Howden and Ralph of Diceto praised his military skill and bravery, portraying him as the ideal Christian knight. His participation in the Third Crusade solidified his reputation as a defender of Christendom, and despite his inability to retake Jerusalem, he was celebrated for his victories against Saladin. However, these accounts were often exaggerated, emphasizing his heroism while downplaying his strategic and political shortcomings. His reputation as a fearless warrior became the foundation for the myths that would emerge in later centuries. Perhaps the most well-known of these myths is the association of Richard with the legend of Robin Hood. Though there is no historical evidence linking Richard to the outlaw of Sherwood Forest, later stories cast him as the rightful and just king whose absence allowed the tyranny of Prince John and the Sheriff of Nottingham to flourish. In these tales, Richard's return to England is portrayed as a moment of triumph, restoring order and justice to the land. This narrative, while compelling, oversimplifies Richard's actual reign and ignores the fact that his absence was largely self-imposed due to his military ambitions abroad. The romanticized view of Richard was further cemented during the 19th century, particularly during the reign of Queen Victoria. The British Empire, at its height, sought historical figures that embodied strength, conquest, and chivalry, and Richard fit this image perfectly. Writers such as Sir Walter Scott played a crucial role in shaping this perception. In his novel Ivanhoe, 1819, Scott depicted Richard as a noble and virtuous ruler, reinforcing the idea that he was England's ideal medieval king. This portrayal resonated with the Victorian audience and contributed to the lasting myth of Richard as a heroic monarch. However, not all historical interpretations of Richard have been uncritical. Modern historians have re-evaluated his reign, pointing out his flaws as a ruler. While his military prowess is undeniable, his neglect of England, his heavy taxation, and his failure to secure a lasting political legacy have been subjects of debate. His decision to spend less than 6 months of his 10-year reign in England suggests that his priorities lay elsewhere, primarily in France and the Crusades. Unlike his father, Henry II, who worked tirelessly to strengthen the legal and administrative systems of his empire, Richard saw England largely as a source of revenue for his military campaigns. Furthermore, Richard's role in the Third Crusade has been reassessed with a more critical lens. While he was undoubtedly a brilliant tactician, his actions during the campaign were not always noble. His execution of Muslim prisoners at Acre, for instance, has been scrutinized as a brutal and politically motivated act rather than an example of chivalry. Additionally, his inability to capture Jerusalem, despite his battlefield successes, raises questions about the overall effectiveness of his leadership in the crusade. The way Richard has been remembered also reflects the evolving views of kingship and governance. In medieval times, kings were often judged by their success in warfare, and by this standard, Richard was seen as one of the greatest. However, as the role of monarchs shifted towards administration and state building, Richard's neglect of domestic affairs became a more glaring weakness. Compared to rulers like Edward I or Henry V, who combined military success with effective governance, Richard appears as a ruler who excelled in battle but lacked the ability or the desire to construct a lasting political order. Richard's legacy also had political implications in later centuries. English monarchs, particularly during times of war or imperial expansion, frequently invoked his name as a symbol of strength and heroism. During World War I, for example, British propaganda often referenced Richard the Lionheart to inspire courage and a sense of national pride. Even today, his name is used in various military and cultural contexts, reinforcing his status as an enduring symbol of warrior kingship. Despite the contradictions in his legacy, Richard remains a figure of fascination. His larger-than-life personality, combined with the dramatic events of his reign, ensures that he continues to capture the imagination of historians, writers, and the general public. Whether seen as a noble crusader, a reckless warrior, or an absentee king, his impact on history and culture is undeniable. His reign serves as both an example of medieval chivalry and a cautionary tale about the limitations of military power without effective governance. Richard the Lionheart's place in history is not defined solely by his actions, but by how those actions have been remembered and interpreted. The reality of his rule is complex. He was a brilliant soldier, a flawed ruler, and a king whose legend has often overshadowed the truth. Yet, it is precisely this complexity that ensures his continued relevance, as each generation finds new ways to interpret the life and legacy of one of medieval England's most famous monarchs. The figure of Richard the Lionheart has been shaped over the centuries by his extraordinary military accomplishments and his equally notable failings as a ruler. While his reign lasted a mere 10 years, his legacy has endured for over 8 centuries, marked by both admiration and criticism. Richard's contributions to medieval warfare and his role in the Third Crusade, along with the myths surrounding his persona, have created a composite image of a king who is simultaneously revered and misunderstood. As history continues to unfold, the enduring relevance of Richard the Lionheart lies not just in the facts of his reign, but in the cultural and historical meanings ascribed to his life and legacy. Richard's military legacy is the cornerstone of his reputation. His campaigns during the Third Crusade remain some of the most studied and admired episodes of medieval warfare. His battle against Saladin, particularly the successful siege of Acre, cemented his reputation as one of the greatest military commanders of his time. His ability to negotiate and fight his way through difficult situations allowed him to secure key victories, and the image of Richard as a warrior king has been a hallmark of his historical legacy. The construction of Chateau Gallard, one of the most advanced fortresses of its time, is a symbol of his military innovation and strategic vision. These feats have contributed to his enduring legacy as a symbol of knightly ideals and martial prowess. However, the centrality of warfare to Richard's identity as a king has also been a source of critique. Despite his triumphs on the battlefield, Richard's reign was marked by his disregard for the administrative and governance aspects of kingship. His absence from England, where he spent only a fraction of his time, led to a weakening of central authority and the disruption of effective governance. While Richard excelled in military strategy, his failure to build a sustainable political infrastructure left his empire vulnerable. His reliance on military conquest for revenue, coupled with his neglect of domestic affairs, created long-term challenges for his successors. The collapse of the Angevin Empire soon after his death is a testament to the fragility of his rule, showing that military success alone does not guarantee lasting power. Richard's legacy has also been shaped by the cultural and political forces that have sought to define him in the centuries following his death. During the Middle Ages, he was celebrated as a hero of the Crusades and a symbol of Christian knighthood. Chroniclers of the time emphasized his valor, generosity, and commitment to the ideals of chivalry. This image was bolstered by the legend of Robin Hood, in which Richard was cast as the rightful and noble king who returned to England to restore justice after being absent on crusade. The contrast between the villainous Prince John and the heroic Richard created a narrative that resonated with medieval audiences and laid the foundation for the heroic myths surrounding Richard's reign. In the modern era, Richard's image underwent further transformation. As the British Empire expanded during the 19th century, Richard was embraced as a symbol of imperial strength and national pride. The romantic ideals of the Victorian period, with its emphasis on chivalry, empire, and military conquest, found a natural alignment with the image of Richard the Lionheart. Authors such as Sir Walter Scott, in his novel Ivanhoe, 1819, helped to immortalize Richard as a noble king, portraying him as a champion of justice and the embodiment of British ideals. This portrayal was less concerned with the realities of his reign and more with shaping a narrative of national identity that could inspire patriotism and pride. Nevertheless, Richard's legacy has not been immune to more critical reassessments. In the 20th and 21st centuries, historians have increasingly highlighted the contradictions in his rule. His disregard for governance, his failure to resolve internal conflicts, and his neglect of his responsibilities to his subjects have been examined with a more discerning lens. His reign, while marked by military brilliance, also left his kingdom politically unstable and financially strained. His reliance on heavy taxation to fund his military campaigns alienated the English nobility and sowed discontent among his subjects. The loss of territories in France under his brother John further complicated his legacy, showing that military prowess was insufficient to maintain an empire in the long term. Richard's character has also been a subject of fascination and debate. Medieval chroniclers portrayed him as a paragon of chivalric virtue, a king who embodied the knightly code of honor, courage, and loyalty. However, modern interpretations often focus on his more complex and less idealized qualities. Richard's participation in the brutal execution of Muslim prisoners during the Third Crusade, his heavy-handed rule over his territories, and his tumultuous relationships with his family members present a more nuanced and sometimes controversial figure. This duality between the heroic legend and the flawed ruler has fueled ongoing discussions about the nature of kingship and the expectations placed on rulers in medieval society. Richard's impact on the political landscape of medieval Europe is another key aspect of his legacy. His rivalry with King Philip II of France, which played out over the course of his reign, was a defining feature of both his reign and the history of the Angevin Empire. The struggle for control over Normandy and other territories in France was a crucial chapter in the long-standing conflict between the Angevin and Capetian dynasties. While Richard's military campaigns temporarily checked Philip's advances, the long-term consequences of his reign would ultimately favor the French monarchy. The loss of the Angevin territories to France after Richard's death marked the end of an era of English dominance in continental Europe and signaled the rise of a new power dynamic in the region. Despite the challenges to his rule and the eventual collapse of the Angevin Empire, Richard's personal legacy has endured in the collective memory of England and the wider world. He is remembered as a king who inspired loyalty and admiration through his courage and determination on the battlefield, as well as through his larger-than-life persona. His name remains synonymous with the virtues of chivalry and knightly honor, and his story continues to be told in literature, theater, and film. Richard's life and death have become emblematic of the medieval ideal of kingship, a king who fought and died for his kingdom, even at the cost of his own life. Richard the Lionheart's legacy is multifaceted. He was a ruler who achieved great military successes, but whose reign was marked by political instability and a lack of long-term vision for his empire. He remains a hero to many, admired for his bravery and chivalric ideals, but also a figure whose flaws remind us that even the most iconic kings cannot escape the consequences of their decisions. Richard's story is one of glory, failure, and myth-making, a testament to the complexity of medieval kingship and the enduring power of memory in shaping historical narratives.